Goeiemôre Simon en ja, welkom weer eens by 'n Suidlanders gesels. Presies wat ons doen, die Suidlanders wat 'n bietjie gesels ek en jy tussen mekaar oor die wêreldgebeure wat in die laaste week of so plaasgevind het. En ek het nog al 'n paar hele interessanthede gesien hierdie week wat gebeur het, maar ek glo jy gaan vir my en die kykers 'n bietjie meer inlig.
Yeah, well, I don't know where to begin. I've got a whole lot of notes here, and I thought to myself, if we talk about all of these things, there won't be enough time. So I'm just going to kick off with a few brief things, and then if you want to explore anything more deeply, or if you believe that if you think I've left out something that I should have mentioned, then feel free to interrupt or query. But
Okay.
I think that in brief, the big things at the moment are in Ukraine, we are seeing a very, very interesting political tussle between the Americans, Europeans, Ukrainians, and Russians, one in which the Russians appear to be getting the upper hand very solidly. And it's noteworthy that Donald Trump is nowhere near keeping his promise of ending the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office, with one phone call. There's terrific wrangling. The Russians have gotten the upper hand in the negotiations, and they're saying we're not going to budge, and we're not going to implement or observe a ceasefire or a truce that is not favorable to us, or which is to our disadvantage. And so the Americans have just sort of ground to a halt. You know, this administration came in with so much promise of sorting it all out. And in that context, we saw one of the most interesting battlefield exercises, if that's the right word, that I have ever seen in my life. I'm not an expert. I'm not a Krijgsvechter type of guy, but I've always had an interest in war history.
Yeah.
And for instance, there's that famous series called The World at War, which aired on Sundays in Afrikaans, translated, a BBC series, 32-part series, narrated by Lord Laurence Olivier. And I remember sitting there watching it, absolutely fascinated, when I was perhaps 8 years old, not understanding a word. Now, I've since watched the entire series another 5 times.
Okay.
So on that basis, as a non-expert, but as somebody who's perhaps, taken an interest in this subject for a long time, like everybody else in the world, I was absolutely flabbergasted to witness Operation Pipeline, where, just to sketch background for those people who don't know, Russia and Ukraine are at war. Russia has invaded Ukraine and occupied significant territories. A few months ago, the Ukrainians hit back with a counter-invasion into Russia, which at the time seemed absolute madness. The Russians had so much the upper hand that it didn't seem as if the Ukrainians would achieve much. But they sent in their best troops, and they managed to occupy a portion of the Kursk region of Russia, a region that adjoins the Sumy and Kharkiv regions of Ukraine. And with their best troops, they were able to hold their ground for a long time. They were pushed back. This salient or pocket that the Ukrainians occupied became smaller and smaller and smaller. And in the end, the only meaningful location that they occupied was the town of Sudzha. On the 1st of January 2025, the Russians stopped supplying natural gas via a certain pipeline because the Ukrainians said that they didn't want it. So in other words, during the course of this entire war, 3 years and a month now, the Russians have continued to supply natural gas to customers like Turkey and others through Ukraine via pipelines. And it's never been kind of a contentious thing from the Russians' point of view. I don't say the Russians are always good all of the time. What I do say is they've always said, listen, we're fed up. We want to go to war with you. However, if you'd like to continue to make $10 billion a year out of the pipeline that runs through your territory, we'll happily, we won't attack the pipeline and we'll keep supplying the natural gas. Anyway, the Ukrainians dug in their heels about something late last year. The Russians turned off the supply on the 1st of January. And lo and behold, they sent 800 troops walking in a 1.4 meter space, walking and crawling, 1.4 meters in diameter, 70 centimeter radius, 15 kilometers to get behind the Ukrainian front lines and attack them there. And in the military world, it is being touted as one of the cleverest operations in history. Excuse me. So that has been absolutely fascinating. And in that context, the Americans are trying to get to grips with Ukraine, rare earth minerals. It turns out that over 70% of the rare earth minerals in Ukraine that the USA wanted in return for its 350 or 500 billion, depending upon which version of accountancy you trust, donations or loans to Ukraine, who wanted the rare earth minerals, lie on oil that is now occupied by Russia. So that's been the big event. Ukraine has suddenly come back to the fore in international news over this past week. Everybody's talking about these dramatic events, the Ukrainians being absolutely squeezed, the Americans trying to negotiate with the Russians outwitting them 3 or 4 times in a row. So I think that this promises to be an interesting year. I personally am still of the conviction that the revelations that were made about a year ago, not quite a year ago, of massive stockpiles of Ukrainian chemical and biological weapons and something like somewhere between 50 and 84 missing nuclear warheads from the 1990s when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union and much of the Soviet Union's war material was on Ukrainian soil, and that was all supposedly given up. But it now turns out that scores and scores of nuclear missiles, nuclear bombs went missing. I am still very, very concerned that Ukraine has in its hands weapons of phenomenal destruction. And if they wish to upset the apple cart, if they wish to subvert this negotiation process that's going entirely in Russia's favor, that they might resort to something absolutely dramatic, Marius.
Ja. Ek moet sê ek het ook baie geniet hierdie pipeline mission wat hulle gedoen het. Dit het my laat terugdink aan ons boereheld Dani Teron wat vir sy manskappe fietsse gegee het en foxholes gegrou het en die Britte uitgeoorlê het. Ek het so lekker te binne my gekry laat iemand weer so buite die boks gedink het om 'n military mission te doen en ek het dit net baie geniet. Dit het my baie laat terugdink aan ons ou boerehelde wat ook sulke dinge gedoen het om die Britte te kon aanvat in daardie tyd. Maar ja, nee, dit is definitief interessant. Ek stem saam met jou, Simon. Trump het gedink hy gaan instap en net sê binne in een dag, boom, hierso, ek gaan sanctions of ek gaan dit of ek gaan dat en almal gaan na die tafel toe kom en dit gaan peace wees. Maar dit is nou nie so maklik nie. En Putin is 'n ouke land. As hy nie 'n ceasefire gaan kry wat vir sy land byvoorbeeld of voordelig is nie byvoorbeeld nie. Voordelig is nie, dan gaan hy gaan dit nie aanvaar nie. Dit is maar nou eenvoudig soos dit.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of interest, Marius, I've often wondered, and I've never looked it up, like for 20 years, it's just an odd word that's stuck in my head. What is the meaning of kalant?
Kalant. 'n kalant, dit is soos vaarbond. as jy 'n kaland is of jy's 'n vaabond. Dit kan in 'n goeie of in 'n slegte term gebeur word. Jy kan vir 'n klein seentjie sê, "Yes, jy's al 'n regte kaland." Dit beteken hy is stout. Hy vang nonsens aan. Maar jy kan hom ook, kom ons sê nou soos in Dani Teron wat hy was 'n voormalige kaland wat die Britte wat geterroriseer het, wil ek amper sê. So dis 'n slegte woord om vir iemand te gebruik, maar dis half verkleinend. Dit is nie so sleg om te sê soos daar's baie erger woorde wat jy iemand kan noem in Afrikaans, maar as jy sê hy's 'n kaland of 'n vaabond, dan is dit 'n stoute ouetjie. Dis 'n stoute kerel. Jy kry 'n jong man nou wat ook 'n bietjie stout is partykeer, maar is nie te sê hulle is sleg in hulle harte nie. Hy is maar net 'n
Marius, on that note, it's always a source of, if I may say so, frustration to me when I meet people who don't know the story of Fritz Duquesne, who is arguably the greatest spy, adventurer, James Bond type character in history. There were many great characters during the French Revolution, for example, who managed to evacuate aristocrats and nobles and what have you from France. You know, the stories are many, 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 many.
Yeah.
But even in that very dignified pantheon of exceptionally brave, exceptionally adventurous characters, in the opinions of experts in the field, Fritz Duquesne, the Boer Krijger, is regarded as the man. What he did in the Boer War, what he did subsequently, what he did in World War I, he was the guy who was responsible for what was effectively the assassination of Alfred Lord Kitchener. What he did in World War II and subsequently, he is really the greatest example in modern times of an adventurer character, and he's a Boer through and through. It's terribly sad that people don't know more about him, and I encourage anybody watching this video who's unfamiliar with his story to read it. Go and read it on Wikipedia. It's unbelievable. And there's a novel written about him called, I think it's called The Man Who Killed Kitchener. Unbelievable. An American friend of mine is currently reading it, and he, screenshots or whatever you call it, he like photographs, scans each page as he goes, and he sends them to me. It's a story like no other in the world. The greatest hero of modern times, the greatest adventurer, the greatest patriot, the guy who risked his neck in ways that many other people, most other people, almost everybody would never dream of doing. I mean, how he got Kitchener killed was, he went to the Germans and he said, "Listen, I've got a very serious issue with this guy, Alfred Lord Kitchener. This punk is the worst of the worst human beings, responsible for the deaths of many of my fellow Boer folk. So I've got an axe to grind. Do you trust me?" They said, "Yeah, well, okay, fair enough. But why are you talking to us?" He said, "I can hand him to you on a plate." They said, "Huh?" He said, "Watch me. I will smuggle." He's got to go to, I think he was on his way to the USA. I forget where. He's going to have to take a ship in the next couple of months to the USA, let's say. I will successfully board that ship under a pseudonym, obviously, a nom de guerre, name of war. And not only will I board the ship, I will take a radio set with me. If you will just give me the frequencies of your submarines, I will send a message when we're at X location in the North Atlantic. Your submarines can come in and blow up the ship with torpedoes. And the Germans said to him, "Oh, you're crazy. Forget about it. Go away." Anyway, with some persistence and perseverance, eventually he got them to believe that he wasn't out of his mind, that he was all for real. Lo and behold, they execute this plot. But he was on the ship. Who calls in a multi-torpedo attack
Yeah.
while standing above the torpedoes as they're hitting.
Wow.
But he backed himself all the way. He was like the Donnie Gerber of James Bond spies, you know.
Okay.
And he backed himself every step of the way. Submarines come in, torpedoes get let loose. He's like standing on the not the bridge, but on the deck, watching the waves. It's a dark and stormy night. He picks up the telltale sign of a torpedo's wash, of the prop's wash, runs to the other side of the boat. This is now like, let's say a mile away. You can see it coming in. Another two there, another one there. Runs to the other side of the boat and starts letting down a lifeboat. The torpedoes hit, massive destruction. People, you know, huge fatalities, enormous percentage of losses. And he gets away in his own little lifeboat while watching Lord Kitchener drown. A terrific story, splendid.
Ja. Ek is definitief besig daarin om daarin te kyk om oor hierdie tipe ouens 'n reeks te doen vir Suidlanders media. Laat die mense kan 'n bietjie meer weet oor ons geskiedenis, wie is ons helde, wie is nie net die groot ouens nie net Piet Retief en Paul Creer nie, maar die ouens soos daai en soos Danie de Ron en weer die ou verhale van boerehelde, Rageltjie de Beer, Japie Greyling, Dirkie Eis. Ek dink is goed dat dit word nie meer in die skole geleer. Ek dink dit gaan goed wees vir ons mense om net weer 'n bietjie trots te kry van waar af ons kom en wat het ons al vermag en hoe dapper daai ouens was.
Yeah, I went to pay homage at the gedenkbeeld, if that's the right word, of, now my brain is freezing up. What's the guy from the Eastern Cape? He was tried as a traitor because the Cape fell under the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Therefore, if you were on the Boer side, but you were from the Cape as opposed to from the republics, you were a traitor. If you were a British citizen, that made you a traitor. What's his name?
My eerder, waar gaan ek dit kry? Die leeu van Wes-Transvaal, man.
No. This is a guy from the Eastern Cape, from die leeu van Wes-Transvaal. Die leeu was General de la Rey. This was a guy who was from, roughly speaking, the Graaf Reinet, Willowmore, Uniondale region. For the life of me, I can't think. Anyway, another good example of somebody to learn about is Donnie Tron, obviously. People just don't know about all of the things that he did. They've no clue how fantastic that guy really was.
Oh, yeah.
There's a long list of brilliant people whose stories are fascinating. You know, if you watch, for instance, a James Bond movie, you're not seeing James Bond do anything that the boerhelde didn't do. You know, it's not like James Bond is the guy and the rest of us try to be like him, but nobody's quite successful. James Bond, if the James Bond movies were based upon the adventures of, say, Fritz Duquesne, nobody would watch the movie because there's a concept called suspension of disbelief. Whatever I watch or listen to, if it's fictional, must be credible enough for me to suspend disbelief. That I don't say, I don't believe that. Look, that's nonsense. There must be an element of truth that is persuasive enough to me to just, that my brain suspends its instinctive desire to disbelieve. But you wouldn't be able to get over that disbelief if you were to see the story of Fritz Duquesne in a movie. It's just too much. A guy calling in torpedoes to, not Alfred Lord Kitchener, but Herbert Kitchener. Calling in torpedoes to strike the very ship on which he is standing.
And getting away.
And getting away, He once jumped ship and swam to an island. I can't remember what the distance was, but like 7 miles or something. And I've never been done, never heard. Absolute nonsense, except that With time, historians have been able to verify that the ship was taking that route. The island was there. Therefore, the nearest point on the ship's trajectory to the island was 7 miles. This kind of thing, through shark-infested waters in the Bahamas or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of brilliant stories. From the sublime to the ridiculous, Marius.
Okay. Yeah.
Iran's bribe of the ANC, the suspension of US aid, 67,000 applicants representing many more people. I, as a father, would apply representing 3 sons, 2 daughters, and a wife. 60,000 applicants expressing interest in becoming refugees to the USA. Whites, Afrikaners, and Ibrahim Rasool getting kicked out of his job, and the ANC not doubling down, not tripling down over the events of the past few weeks, but quadrupling down by trying to accelerate the pace of renaming Santon Drive, excuse me, on which is located the United States Consulate, to Leila Khaled. Leila Khaled was a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, who was she was born in 1944. In 1969, she was the first woman ever to participate in the hijacking of an airplane. The USA is going berserk. The ANC doesn't care. And we're sitting on the sidelines like a first-team rugby player injured. I had a broken collarbone for our main match in under 14s against the Manzimtoti High School. And I had to sit there like a chump and watch my chummies play their hearts out. The rest of us just sitting on the sidelines, in the bleachers, on the stands, watching these people lose their minds. It's incredible. And in the background of that, we've got numerous black people. A woman by the surname of Mashego, notably, many people will have seen the video, going berserk over that. And black people saying things on video, educated black people, intellectuals, people who would be featured in podcasts, interviews, etc., or who have their own reasonably successful YouTube or TikTok channels. These black people using words to describe the African National Congress / the government of South Africa that I'd never use. I could never get away with saying what these black people are saying about the ANC, Marius. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Nee, ek het definitief ook by my YouTube en TikTok feeds het ek 'n hele paar van daardie video's gesien. Ek dink die mooi woord wat ons dalk mag gebruik is mamparras. Hulle het hulle mamparras genoem, maar hulle het hulle definitief baie erger woorde gedoen, soos jy sê. As ons dit nou hier sê en dit kom uit, dan word ons aangekla van allerlei dinge en word in die tronk gegooi. Maar ja, dit maak mense nogal hoopvol dat daar 'n paar is wat logika kan insien en sê, luister hier, dis soos 'n featherweight boxer wat 'n heavyweight boxer probeer aanvat. Die een ou gaan jou 'n haymaker slaan en jy gaan grond toe gaan. Maar jy vat petty en by die ou op die enkel terwyl jy op die grond lê en uitgeslaan is. So, I mean, om nou die straatnaam te verander, dit is nou, wow, dit gaan Amerika nou, dit gaan hulle seermaak. Dit gaan hulle net kwaad maak. Dit gaan hulle nie seermaak enigsins nie. Dit gaan hulle net kwaad maak. Ja, maar in 'n geval. So circus.
Yeah, and for anybody who doesn't know Johannesburg, you have Sandton City. You have Santon Drive running past it. And to the south of Santon City, you have suburbs like Ilovo, Houghton, I beg your pardon, not Houghton, Killarney, And then across the freeway, you've got Lower Houghton and Upper Houghton. And those suburbs are very much dominated, perhaps not in terms of sheer numbers anymore, but they were the Jewish suburbs of Johannesburg. Upper Houghton, Lower Houghton, Killarney, the famous Jewish golf club is in Killarney, Rosebank, Oxford Street. So you've got this endeavor, this attempt to plonk right in the heart of, I mean, the real heart of South African Judaism. This iconography by the renaming of the street.
Yeah.
Leila Khaled, Leila Khaled, Leila Khaled, Leila Khaled. It's antagonistic beyond anybody's imagination. I never thought I'd ever see such antagonism, especially given that Jews were by far the greatest non-black supporters of the ANC, or let's say the freedom struggle. Even the coloreds and the Indians, I think they may feel differently. Some people may watch this video and be highly offended. That's okay. I'm not going out of my way to antagonize anybody. This is my considered opinion. And I have paid close attention to this subject for decades, 3.5 decades. It is my considered opinion that if weighed on a scale, the contribution of Jews to the struggle was greater than that of, let's say, English-speaking South Africans, the handful of Afrikaner South Africans, and coloreds and Indians. I don't think that any other ethnic group did as much to ensure the success of the African National Congress and the general success of the struggle than the Jews. And here in their heartland, the ANC is basically, giving an up yours alongside the US Embassy. So they're going out of their way to antagonize everybody that they can. And I think that it's going to come to a head sooner or later, like a pimple, just give it.
Yeah.
Your pimple's bothering you. If your child is complaining, oh, it's so sore. So, oh, don't worry. Go to bed. Tomorrow morning we'll see about it. I'll give you a hand to get rid of that thing.
Yeah.
I think that we don't have to do much, but get a good night's sleep, astavara, and wake up in a day or two's time and see that this thing is popping off. I really think that it is coming to a head. It can't carry on like this without something giving, Marius.
Ja. Dis asof hulle probeer om vyande te maak oral. Ek verstaan dit. Elke land probeer om soveel as moontlik allies en vriende te kry en wat ook al te kry om jou te support en jy support hulle, en ek bedoel dis goed vir die ekonomie en maar dis asof ons regering probeer om soveel as moontlik vyande reg oor die wêreld te probeer maak. Ja, dit gaan my verstand te bowe. Ek weet net nie wat nie. En dit is asof ons regering glo hulle is die magtigste wat daar is, en solank hulle maar net uitgelos word en hulle eie ding doen, gaan hulle alright wees.
Yeah, I think that this is a personal suspicion. It's not necessarily something shared by Mr. Miller, or it's not necessarily a policy or doctrine of the Suidlanders. Speaking only for myself, I am very firmly convinced that this is a spoiling tactic, what we call in English a spoiling tactic, as part of the National Democratic Revolution. It's my opinion, and may I turn out to be wrong, that this counterintuitive, self-destructive behavior is not as accidental or incompetent as it may appear to be, but rather far more calculated and cunning than it appears to be, that its very intention is to provoke levels of tension in South Africa that precipitate a national civil crisis.
Yeah.
In my opinion, there are too many pieces of evidence pointing in that direction. It's a bit like, let's say, for instance, your son, may heaven forfend it, comes home and there's a slight whiff of tobacco about him. No, you don't say anything. The next week you catch it again. Again, may heaven forfend it, but a relative passed away some years ago of lung cancer, and you hate smoking. You can't bear it. You don't say anything. It happens a third time. You confront your son, and he says, "No, no, 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 Dad, I promise you, I would never smoke. It's Johnny. You know, Johnny and I are so close, and he smokes every morning before school. He smokes in between classes. He smokes a small break and big break, and before rugby practice." We had a guy like that, Hamish Hurd, lovely guy, just splendid human being, but that was his game. And you believe him, and then it happens another 9 times, and finally you wake up and you realize you're being stupid.
Hmm.
You're being fooled, and you were stupid to allow the fooling to go on for as long as it has. In my opinion, we are going to look back upon this period of time and think to ourselves, how did I not see it? There was this piece of evidence, there was that behavior, there was the increase in VAT, which was certainly going to have a certain effect. The increase in VAT, like your son coming home just on one occasion, smelling slightly of tobacco, that's not proof positive. But in retrospect, you look back and you say, taken together,
yeah,
the Leila Khaled story, the thing with the USA, the passage of the expropriation without compensation law, lo and behold, promptly after that, the passage of the law pertaining to the preservation and development of agricultural land. All of these things, all at the same time, I put it to you, we will later recognize as having been facets of one concerted project to force the critical moment of the national democratic revolution. If something hasn't happened a year from now, many people are going to say, well, Simon stuck his neck out and he stuck it out a long, long way. He's lost all credibility. But that's where I stand at the moment on this. I just cannot believe, knowing what I do about feathers, clouds, suns, women, shoelaces, apples, horses, cars, carburetors, gear sticks, sumps. Given my entire life experience, I cannot believe that for the first time in my life, so many contributory factors that all point in the same direction are a mere coincidence. Just an accident. And I know that we're running out of time, Marius, so I'm going to leave it there if it's okay with you, and I'll let you finish.
Ja, nee Simon, ek dink as mens die hele legkaart terugstaan en jy vat elke liewe puzzle piece soos jy nou gesê het en jy kyk daarna, dan dit moet behalf beplan wees. Dit kan nie net soos jy sê coincidence wees nie. Maar ja, op daardie noot Simon, dankie weer eens vir 'n lekker gesels en ons maak weer volgende week so en ja, kan nie wag om jou video van die naweek te sien wat gaan uitkom nie.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute for a second. Yeah, and Marius, once again, my apologies for being the guy who led to the postponement of this video. But as you know, yesterday afternoon was very adventurous for us. We lost a sump. You know, I was helping some people and ended up being an 11 o'clock at night thing. So I apologize for being that guy again, and look forward to seeing you next Thursday. All right, then. Goodbye and God bless, Marius.